At my husband's funeral, his young wife, Chloe, cried perfectly for the cameras. She was the star. I was just the old widow in the front row, the relic she was already planning to evict. She thought she had inherited it all, the penthouse, the money, the life I had built. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that my husband had been living in my house all along. The sound I remember most from the funeral was the clicking. It was not a respectful silence. It was the constant, sharp click, click, click of smartphone cameras, pointed not at the polished casket, but at the woman beside it. My husband's young wife, Chloe, was the star of the event. She wore a black dress that was expertly tailored, her grief displayed as perfectly as her makeup. Her people, young and sharp-eyed, flocked to her. They held her hands, they filmed their condolences, they posted selfies with filtered tears. I sat in the front row, separate. I am Ilara. I am 73. I was Arthur's first wife. The old widow, as the screens in their hands would later call me. The service was held in a modern event center, not a church. It was all glass walls. White orchids and a digital slideshow of Arthur's life. The slideshow featured images from the last 3 years. Arthur on a yacht, Arthur skiing, Arthur and Chloe, their teeth aggressively white, toasting champagne. There were no pictures of me, no trace of the 40 years we built the life that paid for this room. A young man with a tight haircut knelt before Chloe. He was holding his phone, the screen recording. "He was such an icon, Chloe," the man said, his voice breaking on cue. "We're all here for you. The city is mourning with you." Chloe touched a tissue to her eye, careful not to smudge. "Thank you, Jason. It just means so much. Arthur, he loved his followers." I looked away, toward the glass wall. The city stretched out below, indifferent and loud. Cars and trains moved like circuits on a board. I felt the familiar chill of abandonment. It was a feeling I had known long before Arthur's heart finally gave out. I had met him when I was 30. I had just founded my first company, a small logistics firm built on an idea I had in my spare bedroom. He was charming, ambitious, and loved the life I could provide. I was the original architect. He just moved into the house I built. Then, 3 years ago, he discovered he wanted a new architect, a younger one, Chloe. The service ended. The music swelled. It was not a hymn. It was some popular, mournful song. The digital slideshow faded to black. People filed out, their hands reaching for Chloe, their eyes glancing at me. I saw the pity. I saw the judgment. The poor old thing. Why did she even come? I came because my name was on the invitations. Chloe had insisted. It was part of the performance. The magnanimous new wife, tolerant of the relic. We returned to the penthouse. My penthouse. The heavy soundproof door closed, but the noise just changed shape. Chloe's friends were here, sitting Shiva, with cocktails and a curated playlist. They were already changing out of their black clothes. They talked about restaurant openings and online drama. I retreated to the kitchen, a vast space of steel and marble. I just wanted a glass of water. The air smelled of expensive perfume and gin. My head ached. I found a glass, my hand shaking slightly as I filled it from the tap. I gripped the cold, smooth surface. It was real. It was solid. "There you are." I turned. Chloe stood in the doorway, her phone in her hand. The performance was over. Her face was hard, her eyes bright and analytical. That was. "A lot," she said. I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "Look, Alara," she said, tapping her phone screen, making it go dark. "I'm being generous letting you stay here tonight. I know this is hard for you. But the service was today. It's time to move on." The words hung in the air, clinical and sharp. "I've scheduled a deep clean for tomorrow morning. You understand? A new start." I stared at her. The young woman who had slept in my husband's bed, in my home, was now talking about erasing the last traces of him. And me. "Chloe," I started, my voice thin. "Don't," she cut me off. "It's done. I've already spoken to Arthur's lawyers. My lawyers now. Everything is ironclad. The house, the portfolio, it's all mine." She did not look sad. She looked efficient. "I need you to be out by noon," she said. "I'm sure one of your friends has a spare room, or something." She turned, ready to walk away. "I'll wait," I said. She paused, looking back over her shoulder. "Wait for what?" "For my lawyer," I said. "He is coming tomorrow, at 10. Chloe actually laughed. It was a short, sharp sound like breaking glass. "Your lawyer? Honey, you're wasting your time. But fine, be here at 10. See what good it does you." She walked away, her silk robe rustling, leaving me alone in the cold, bright kitchen. I did not sleep in my old bedroom. I slept in the guest room, a smaller, sterile space down the hall. The sheets were stiff. I woke up before the sun, the city lights still bright outside the window. For a moment I was confused. This room was not familiar. It had none of my things. The penthouse was quiet. The party, at least, was over. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. The digital clock on the bedside table read 5:17 a.m. I showered and dressed in the simple gray slacks and blue blouse I had worn the day before. I was packing nothing. I was leaving nothing behind. When I finally opened the guest room door, the silence was gone. I heard voices, not the hushed tones of grief, but sharp, efficient commands. And I smelled it, a strong chemical smell, industrial cleaner and something else, something trying to cover the smell of bleach. I walked down the long, white hallway. The art on the walls was modern, cold. Arthur had replaced all my paintings. I stopped at the entrance to the main living area. Chloe was already at work. She wore expensive-looking black activewear, her hair pulled back in a high, tight ponytail. She held a green juice in one hand and pointed with the other. Two young men in gray uniforms stood by the main bookshelf. Their shirts had a logo, BioClean, the Fresh Start Service. They were not cleaning. They were packing. They were systematically stripping Arthur's study area. Books were swept into a box. Framed photos were dumped on the floor in a pile. "All of this too," Chloe said, pointing to Arthur's desk. "The computer, the papers, all of it. Just box it for donation." "And these, ma'am?" one of the men asked. He held up a small silver frame. I saw it from across the room. It was an old photo, one I thought Arthur had thrown away decades ago. It was me and him, 20 years old, standing in front of my first office. We were smiling. We looked happy. Chloe glanced at it. Her lip curled. "Toss that. It's just trash." The man, not knowing, tossed it into a black plastic bag meant for garbage. I felt a sharp, cold sting. I was being erased, not just from the present, but from the past. My own history, discarded by a woman who had no part in it. I watched, invisible from the hallway. They were fast. They moved to the closets, pulling out Arthur's expensive suits, his shoes, his clothes. They folded nothing. They just packed it all into large, sterile boxes, sealing them with blue tape. Chloe supervised it all, energized. She was cleansing the space. She was purging the life we had built. I looked at the clock on the wall. A digital display, set into the glass. 9:45 a.m. I stepped out of the hallway. Chloe saw me. Her bright, efficient mask slipped for just a second. She looked annoyed. "Oh," she said. "You're still here." She took a loud sip of her juice. "I thought you'd be gone by now. As you can see, we're very busy. Getting rid of the old, in with the new." She gestured at the boxes. "It feels good, doesn't it? A fresh start." I did not answer her. I walked past her, past the men in their gray uniforms, past the boxes of my husband's life. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The city was fully awake now. The sun was bright, bouncing off the cars and buildings miles below. I could see the river, a flat gray line cutting through the concrete. I just stared, letting the height and the silence of the glass steady me. I focused on my breathing. "In, out. You're just going to stand there?" Chloe asked, her voice sharp with impatience. "You're making my team uncomfortable." I continued to look out the window. "They are your team, not mine." "This is my house, Alara," she said, her voice rising. "And I want you out, now." I checked my watch. 9:59 a.m. As if on cue, the buzzer for the private elevator rang. A short electronic chime. Chloe's entire posture changed. A wide, satisfied smile spread across her face. "Ah," she said, setting her juice down. "Perfect timing." She looked at me, her eyes gleaming. "That'll be the movers for your things. I called them for you to help you out. You can thank me later." I finally turned away from the window. I looked her straight in the eye. "No," I said. "That will be Mr. Davies." Chloe pressed the talk button on the wall panel, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Send him right up," she said into the speaker. She turned to me, her smile tight and sharp. "See? So efficient. They'll have your junk out of here, and then you can go." The elevator doors, usually silent, opened with a soft whoosh down the hall. Chloe walked toward the entrance, expecting to see men in moving uniforms. She stopped. Mr. Davies was not a mover. He was a man in his late 60s, wearing a perfectly pressed dark gray suit. He was neat, methodical, and carried a single worn leather briefcase. He smelled faintly of paper and peppermint. He did not look at Chloe. He looked directly at me. "Alara," he said, a simple, respectful greeting. "Mr. Davies." "Thank you for coming," I said. Chloe stared at him, her smile gone. "Who are you?" "This is Mr. Davies," I said again, my voice quiet. "My attorney." "I heard you the first time," Chloe snapped. She sized him up, dismissing him. "Look, Mr. Davies, you've wasted a trip." As I told Alara, everything has been handled. My lawyers have been through Arthur's will. It's ironclad. Mr. Davies did not react to her. He continued to look at me as he spoke, his voice calm and clear. "Are these men," he gestured to the 2 BioClean workers, who were still holding boxes, "with you, Alara?" "No," I said. "They are with her." Only then did Mr. Davies turn his attention to the workers. His voice remained quiet, but it had a new edge of authority. "Gentlemen," he said, "please stop what you're doing. Put down those boxes." The men looked at Chloe. "Don't listen to him," Chloe said, stepping forward. "You work for me." "I am Mrs. Vance. This is my house." "Keep packing." The men hesitated. They were young, caught in the middle. Mr. Davies set his briefcase down on the marble dining table. He clicked the 2 brass latches, and they sprang open with a soft thwack. He did not open it. He just looked at the men. "I am counsel for Alara Vance," he said, his voice projecting easily across the large room. "She is the sole and legal owner of this estate. Everything you are holding, everything in those boxes, is her property. If you continue, I will have to inform your employer that you are actively participating in theft." The 2 men dropped the boxes. One landed with a heavy final thud on the hardwood floor. "What did you say?" Chloe's voice was no longer sharp. It was high and shaking. "You can't just come in here. This is my home." "Arthur left it to me." "You are mistaken," Mr. Davies said simply. He turned back to his briefcase. "I am not." She shouted. The BioClean workers were already backing away, moving toward the hallway. I have the will. My lawyers? My lawyers. Your lawyers, I am sure, expertly handled the will of Arthur Vance, Mr. Davies said. He pulled out a large, thick folder bound with a blue ribbon. I am not here to discuss Arthur's will. I am Alara's counsel. I am here to discuss her property. Chloe's face was red. The green juice was forgotten. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. She was losing control, and she knew it. The audience of cleaners was watching her mask fall apart. You can't do this, she said, her voice dropping to a low hiss. I am calling security. I am having you both thrown out. You are trespassing. She reached for the wall panel, her hand shaking. Mr. Davies did not stop her. He did not look up. He simply untied the blue ribbon with slow, deliberate movements. He opened the folder and took out the first document. He placed it squarely in the center of the marble table, facing her. By all means, call them, Mr. Davies said, tapping the paper. They will need to see this. Chloe's hand trembled as she jabbed the button on the wall panel. She wasn't just angry anymore. I saw a flicker of real panic in her eyes. Security, she said, her voice strained, too high. This is Chloe Vance in the penthouse. I have 2 people here who are trespassing. They are refusing to leave. I need them removed, immediately. She let go of the button, her chest heaving. She crossed her arms, trying to look powerful. They'll be here in 2 minutes. You should have left when I told you to. Mr. Davies had not moved. He simply stood by the table, his hands resting on the open folder. That will not be necessary, Ms. Renault, he said. He looked at the 2 BioClean men who were still lingering by the hallway. You 2, you may go. Your service is not required. The men looked at Chloe, then at Mr. Davies, then at each other. They nodded once, and in complete silence, they grabbed their empty cleaning caddies and walked out, leaving the front door slightly ajar. Where are they going? Chloe demanded. I hired them. They were wise to leave, Mr. Davies said. He slid the first document further into the light. Now, as I was saying, the intercom crackled. Mrs. Vance, we have a Mr. Davies on our resident list as an approved guest for Mrs. Alara Vance. Can you confirm the situation? Chloe's face went white. She stared at the speaker, speechless. Mr. Davies spoke toward the panel, his voice unchanged. This is Davies. The situation is resolved. Thank you, Head of Security. We will not be needing you. Very good, sir, the voice replied. Then silence. Chloe looked as if she had been slapped. She turned slowly from the wall panel back to the table. What? What is that? She whispered, pointing at the paper. This, Mr. Davies said, tapping the document, is the original founding charter for a company. Vance Renault Logistics. Renault was Alara's name. It is dated 1975. Logistics? What is that? That has nothing to do with this house, Chloe said, shaking her head, trying to clear it. On the contrary, Mr. Davies said. He slid a second document from his folder. The company, founded solely by Alara Renault, purchased this penthouse property in 1980. It was her first major asset. The company owns this building. The company owns the art on the walls, the cars in the garage, and the accounts that paid for. Well, everything. He paused, letting the words settle in the quiet room. And Alara Vance, he said, is the sole 100% owner of Vance Renault Logistics. She always has been. I watched Chloe. She was processing. Her eyes darted from me to Mr. Davies to the walls. She was seeing the room for the first time, not as her home, but as a corporate asset. No, she stammered. No, Arthur. Arthur told me he built all this. He was the CEO. He was, I said, my voice quiet but clear. It was the first time I had spoken. I appointed him CEO. It gave him something to do, Mr. Davies continued, his voice precise. When you, Alara, married Arthur, you were generous. You created a premarital trust. This trust granted Arthur residency rights in this penthouse. It also paid him a significant stipend. He pulled a third document. But the trust had one very clear condition. The rights and the stipend were contingent on his marriage to Alara Vance. He looked directly at Chloe. When Arthur chose to divorce Alara 3 years ago, his rights to this property and to the stipend were terminated immediately. Chloe stared at the paper. Terminated, but he lived here. We lived here. Yes, I said. I let him. I did not force him out. It seemed cruel at the time. I let him continue to live in my house. I let him continue to pretend it was his. The full weight of it finally landed. Chloe sank onto the arm of the sofa. The boxes of Arthur's clothes were at her feet. She was not a grieving widow. She was not the lady of the house. She was just a guest whose host had just died. So I have nothing, she whispered. You have what Arthur left you in his personal will, Mr. Davies said, which, as I understand it, consists of several credit cards with significant debt, a leased sports car, and his watch collection. The watches at least are authentic. Chloe was silent. Her mind was working, her eyes scanning the room, searching for an angle, a way out. Then her gaze fixed on something, her purse, which she had left on the entry table. No, she said, her voice suddenly different. A strange new hope. No, you're wrong. She stood up and walked to the purse. She pulled out her wallet, her fingers scrambling inside. He married me, she said, her voice rising. He married me. I have the certificate. She found it. A folded piece of paper. She held it up, a desperate, wild look in her eyes. I am Mrs. Vance. I am his wife. Chloe stood there in the middle of the living room, her arm extended, holding the folded piece of paper high. It was a white document, official, with a state seal. Her hand was shaking so badly the paper made a small rustling sound. This, she said, her voice strained, is a marriage certificate. It is legal. It is binding. It proves I am Mrs. Vance. She looked at me, then at Mr. Davies. She was looking for an argument, for a fight. She was desperate. Mr. Davies did not even look at the paper. His gaze remained on her face. His voice was still calm, patient, as if explaining a simple math problem to a child. Yes, Ms. Renaud, he said. That is a marriage certificate. So you see, she almost shouted, I am his wife. This is my house. This is my life. He gave it to me. It proves, Mr. Davies said, correcting her, that you were legally married to Arthur Vance. It does not prove that you are the owner of this penthouse. It's the same thing, she insisted. I am his widow. No, Mr. Davies said. The word was not loud, but it cut through her hysteria and left a heavy silence. It is not the same thing. You were married to a man, Ms. Renaud. You were not married to Alara's private trust. He gestured to the folder still open on the table. The trust I spoke of, the one Alara established 45 years ago, that is the legal entity that owns this home. Your marriage certificate gives you no claim on that trust. You are a stranger to it. Chloe's arm lowered slowly. The paper was still clutched in her hand. I don't understand, she stammered. I am his widow. I get the widow's share. Everyone knows that. You are indeed Arthur's widow, Mr. Davies agreed. And you are entitled to the widow's share of Arthur's personal estate. I watched her face. I saw the moment she remembered what he had said earlier. His watches? She whispered. And his debts, Mr. Davies said, which, as I mentioned, are significant. The stipend he was receiving from Alara's trust was his only income, and that income was terminated 3 years ago, at their divorce. He has been living on credit ever since. Chloe shook her head, a violent, jerky motion. No, he told me. He told me he was wealthy. He told me all of this. This, she waved her hand at the room, was his. He was, I said, and she flinched, as if surprised I was still there. He was living a life I provided, first as my husband, and then, for the last 3 years, as my tenant. A tenant I chose not to evict. This is a lie, she said. but her voice had no power. She looked at the marriage certificate in her hand, as if seeing it for the first time. It was just a piece of paper. It held no magic. This can't be. It is the fact, Ms. Renault, Mr. Davies said. Your marriage to Arthur gave you a legal status with him. His death dissolved that marriage. Your status as his widow gives you a claim on his personal and now insolvent estate. It gives you absolutely no claim on Alara Vance or her property. He paused, then added very clearly, You were never Mrs. Vance in the eyes of this trust. You were simply his second wife, and your time here is over. The finality of it hit her. The color drained from her face, leaving her makeup looking like a mask. She looked around the room, at the boxes of Arthur's clothes, the ones she had ordered the cleaners to pack. They were sealed with blue tape, ready to go. She looked at the open door, where the cleaners had fled. Then, her eyes landed on the hallway, by the elevator. She saw her own luggage, the expensive monogrammed suitcases she had packed for her new start earlier that morning. Chloe's eyes were fixed on her luggage. The two large cream-colored suitcases stood by the door. They were expensive, monogrammed with her initials. She had packed them herself, full of clothes for her new life. She had been so efficient, so eager to start. I looked at her. The sharp, commanding woman from an hour ago was gone. She was just a young person, standing in a room that was not hers, her hands empty. The marriage certificate was still in her grasp, now crumpled. "Chloe," I said. She jumped, her head snapping toward me. Her eyes were wide. "You have 1 hour," I said. "You will take your bags, and you will leave my home." The words were simple. They were not cruel. They were a statement of fact. A strange thing happened. Her face, which had been pale with shock, suddenly crumpled. The hardness, the confidence, the performance, it all dissolved. Tears welled in her eyes, real ones this time. "Alara," she whispered. Her voice was small. She took a step toward me, her hand half-reaching. "Alara, please!" I did not move. "Please!" she said again, the tears now rolling down her face, ruining her makeup. "You have to understand. I loved him. I really did." I thought of the photograph in the trash bag. I thought of the clicks of the cameras at the funeral. I thought of her voice just an hour ago, telling me to get out. "Woman to woman," she said, trying a new tactic. What am I supposed to do? "I have nowhere to go. He left me with nothing." "No," I said, my voice firm. "He left you with his debts. I left you with your life. You are young. You will find another." She flinched. She saw there was no pity here for her. The tears stopped as quickly as they had started. I turned to Mr. Davies, who had been watching, silent. "Mr. Davies, one more thing." "Yes, Alara," he said. "In the last 3 years," I said, "Arthur was generous. He gifted Ms. Renault several items. A white convertible, several pieces of jewelry." I saw the statements. Chloe's head shot up. "He gave those to me. They're mine." Mr. Davies looked at a paper in his folder. "The car Ms. Renault is leased. The lease is in the name of the Vance Renault Logistics Trust. It is, therefore, Alara's car. As for the jewelry," he looked up, "it was purchased using a credit card. A card that was, and is, tied directly to the Trust's main account. Those items are not gifts. They are unapproved corporate expenses." He looked at me. "Alara?" "I want them back," I said. Mr. Davies nodded. "I will have my office contact you, Ms. Renault, regarding the immediate return of the Trust's assets. If you fail to comply, we will, of course, involve the police." That was it. That was the final blow. The car, the diamonds, they were props for her new life. And I was taking them away. Chloe said nothing. She was completely broken. Her shoulders slumped. She walked past me, past Mr. Davies. She did not look at us. She picked up her crumpled marriage certificate from the floor and put it in her pocket. Then she pulled out her phone. Her fingers, which had so confidently tapped out orders all morning, now fumbled with the screen. I heard her request a ride share. Her voice was a dull monotone. She went to the door. She grabbed the handle of the first large, heavy suitcase. She pulled it, the wheels rumbling loudly on the marble floor. She took it to the elevator and pressed the button. She had to come back for the second bag. She struggled with it. It was heavy. She was a fallen queen, dragging the weight of her own ambition. She got both bags into the elevator. She stepped in. For a second, she just stood there, facing the open doors. She did not look at me. Then, the elevator doors slid shut, silent and final. She was gone. I stood in the vast, silent penthouse. Mr. Davies was quietly packing his briefcase. The boxes from the BioClean team were still in the middle of the room. The half-drunk green juice was still on the counter. The apartment was a mess, frozen at the moment of confrontation. Mr. Davies clicked his briefcase shut. "Elara?" he asked gently. I looked around. I was home. For the first time in 3 years, I was truly alone in my own home, and it was completely, terribly quiet. Mr. Davies closed his briefcase. The soft click of the latches echoed in the silent room. "Well," he said, his voice gentle, "that is done." I was still standing by the window. The city outside was moving, busy and loud, but in here there was no sound at all. The penthouse felt huge, empty. "What do you want to do with this?" Mr. Davies asked, gesturing to the boxes and the half-drunk green juice. I looked at the mess. Chloe's failed attempt to erase me. The boxes of Arthur's clothes, taped up and ready for donation, just not in the way she had intended. I walked over to the kitchen counter and picked up the juice glass. It was still cold. I poured the green liquid down the sink. The sound of the water running was a relief. I rinsed the glass and set it carefully in the dishwasher. One small act of order. Then I saw the black plastic trash bag, the one the cleaner had tossed the photograph into. I walked over to it. It was resting against the leg of the bookshelf. I untied the sloppy knot. I did not want to look inside, but I had to. I saw papers, dust, and the silver gleam of the frame. I reached in and pulled it out. The glass was not broken. It was me and Arthur. We were in our 20s. We were standing in front of my first tiny office. I was holding a set of keys, and he had his arm around me. We were both smiling, and our smiles were real. We looked young, and we looked hopeful. I held the photo. I looked at the young man, the one who had not yet abandoned me, the one who had not yet been eclipsed by the life I gave him. "Elara?" Mr. Davies asked. I turned, holding the small frame. "What do you want to do with his suits?" "The boxes?" he asked. I looked at the pile. All the expensive, tailored things he had used to play the part of the man who had built all this. "Donate them," I said. "All of it. Send them to a service that helps men get back on their feet. Men who need a second chance." Mr. Davies nodded, a small, respectful smile on his face. "I will arrange it this afternoon. I'll have my own people come for them, people who know what they're doing." "Thank you, Mr. Davies," I said, "for everything." "It has been my privilege, Elara," he said. He picked up his briefcase. "You know where to reach me." He walked to the elevator and pressed the button. He did not look back. The doors opened, he stepped in, and he was gone. I was finally alone. The silence returned. But it felt different now. It was not the cold silence of abandonment. It was not the hollow silence of an empty home. It was just quiet. It was the sound of my own space. I walked through the living room. I set the small silver frame photo down on a side table. It was not a shrine. It was just a fact, a part of my history, a part of the story that led to today. I went back to the large floor-to-ceiling window. The sun was high now, past noon. The city was laid out before me, bright and clear. I could see the bridges, the parks, the river moving slowly to the sea. I owned this view. I had built the company that bought the window that framed it. I am Elara. I am 73. I am not the old widow. I am the owner, and I am in my house.